Good evening and welcome to Pello Talk. I'm Dave Pello, your host for the evening. And tonight we've got a really great show lined up with three guests. And joining us will be Senator James McGrath, Wendy Francis, and also Kurt Malberg. And I'm looking forward to having a chat with all of them tonight. So tonight we're going to do something a little bit different from usual. I'm actually going to just talk with Senator James McGrath for a few minutes one-on-one and introduce him to a lot of the audience. There's a lot of things. In fact, I had coffee with him this morning and we chatted for a long time. And then just before we went live right now, found out something I'd never heard before, really, really interesting. And then in about 10 to 15 minutes, we'll jump in and expand the conversation and go a little bit further. So welcome to the show this evening to Senator James McGrath. How are you?
I'm brilliant. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you very much for coming. Now, you are a member of the LNP and a senator representing Queensland.
That's true. Very, very proud member of the LNP.
Now, you're actually a very, very long time Conservative politician, and you've literally been all around the world serving the Conservative cause. So how old were you when you got in? Because I feel like I've only got perhaps the recent history in my mind.
I suppose probably one of the best ways to think about me, or I think about myself, is I'm a complete and utter nerd. And I'm a proud nerd in that I love the battle of ideas, and I love the battle between left and right. I was raised on a cane farm on the Sunshine Coast. My folks were very political, and so to me, politics and policy and the fight about ideas is a perfectly natural thing to do. But sadly, for the rest of society, they see people like yourself, Dave, and myself, and Kurt, Wendy, as a little bit different, which I think is sad. The first proper campaign I was involved with was in 1989, when sadly we lost our party, the National Party, who weren't in coalition with the Libs, sadly lost power to Wayne Goss and Labor. And that started my hunger and my thirst to always stand up for what I think is right, even if sometimes even my own friends think I'm wrong.
No, I like disagreeing with my friends. If I can't hear them tell me I'm wrong, who can I? And there's nothing I like more than being relieved of the burden of ignorance. Some people say it's bliss, but I just find it's a liability. Now, you got into election consulting, campaign strategy, and you actually became quite sought after for that advice and that consultation. How did you get into that gig?
Well, I went to university. I like many people going to politics. I studied law. I'm going to be particularly honest. I didn't really enjoy law. I thought there was more to life than 6-minute units, and I wrote to the Conservative Party in the United Kingdom. They were desperate. I probably didn't tell the whole truth of my CV. I sort of probably added to a bit. Anyway, so this was back in 2002. And it was when the Conservatives were really, they just lost their second landslide election. Nobody liked us. People almost spitting on you in the street because you're still seen as a Tory, and they were blaming you for all sorts of things. To me, that's just that's a manna from heaven for me to be in such an environment, because it's when you're at your lowest you really find your strength. So I was very fortunate. I worked for the Conservatives. I can name drop better than most people, which I won't do in terms of Conservative Party politicians.
Well, let me do it on your behalf, because I want to keep moving quickly and don't want to spend too long on your resume. So the highlights are you were actually on the winning campaign to get Boris Johnson elected as Mayor of London. What a feather in your cap now with him as the PM. Do you have does the red phone ring when you call?
No, it doesn't ring. So I've sent him a few messages, and I was supposed to catch up with him when I was in the UK in January. But funnily enough, the day I was going to Downing Street, he got called away, so we didn't see each other. But the thing about Boris, I'll touch upon this, is you want politicians who have passion. You want
Yep.
politicians who have the joy of life about them. And too often on our side of politics, sometimes our politicians are like the dementors. They just suck the happiness out of you, and I think that's wrong. We should be proud of our broad, centre-right conservative ideology. It's the ideology that has built prosperity, not just in Australia, but in many parts of the world. And I think Boris, with his exuberance, is a living example of that.
Now, you've also helped. Was Maldives successful?
Maldives was successful. It was for a former political prisoner, and we were able to. And he was the Amnesty International Prisoner of the Year. He got the plaque to hang in his jail cell and all those types of things.
It's not something to aspire to.
No, it was a bit serious. He wasn't properly. He wasn't tortured like with electrodes being attached to him, but they'd pour honey over him, tie him to a chair, and put him over like an ant's nest and things like that. And it was their first free election.
Wow.
And we were able to I was campaign director, defeat that country's dictator who'd won the previous 6 elections with 96 to 97% of the vote.
It's a lot different when you're not stuffing the ballot.
Yes, exactly. And when people have freedom and they have choice.
Now, we'll get on to one of the other very successful campaigns before we finish off with a very interesting one. And that was, of course, you were the architect of the Queensland LNP landslide, unprecedented word of the year, election campaign that saw Campbell Newman relegate opposition status to a gift for the Labor Party out of the generosity of his heart. That was quite a big one, and I was campaign director for one of the unwinnable seats in that electorate, many of which were won. So thank you for your assistance in winning that seat. But I think what's really interesting is get a load of this, listeners. James McGrath went up against a campaign that was backed by Vladimir Putin in Mongolia, of all places. So tell us a little bit about that. How did you and Putin go head to head?
Well, the British Conservative Party are very good at trying to promote sister and brother parties around the world. Those who believe in the broad values of the conservative movement. And so a number of us were sent across to Mongolia to help in their 2004 parliamentary elections. And it was the Cold War still being fought out. The British Conservatives were backing one party who broadly had the name the Motherland Alliance, and Putin, this is true, Putin's mob were backing the ex-communists. And they are in power, and they do what ex-communists always do, and communists do. They took over every billboard. You'd go to these little dusty towns, and I spent a fair bit of time out on the road, and the communists would have the edifice, the big, strong, powerful building in the town, whereas our mob, they would have some little shanty. They had no money, no resources. It was a typical conservative campaign because we're always the underdogs. No matter what the left say, those on the right of politics are the underdogs because we don't have the backing of the powerful. We have the backing of, the small, and I think that's good. Small people, small organisations, and that's what makes us. That's what can make us so strong when we come together.
Now, one of the ideas I want to explore to you very quickly is the idea of preferences, of how to vote cards. We were talking earlier today about how a party can be judged based on, it seems like, the company it keeps, and yet preferences aren't exactly a statement of camaraderie. They're a statement of strategy, really. And this is something that I experienced when I was helping with the Family First Party and got to be involved in the preference discussions. And people, it was forever that people were saying, how can you preference party X when they don't share your values above party Y, who really clearly share your values? I'm like, well, sometimes it's about helping you get the most representation from your vote as possible. And the way we do that is by making deals to get the kind of policies and concessions that we want from the other from the other parties. And what we have to trade with is our preferences. And so it wasn't just a flat out statement of who we liked the best or who we thought was the most moral and virtuous. What are your insights on the way preferences are decided? Because quite often, you're especially going to get the Labor Party and the media really trying to pressure the Liberal Party to put other right-wing parties beneath the Labor Party of all people, and then calling you racists and all kinds of horrible things if you don't.
Totally. The media treat the Coalition Liberal National Party very differently to how they treat Labor. Labor have already done their preference deal with the Greens. It's clear. That's why things aren't happening in Queensland, because Labor have done a secret deal with the Greens in relation to ensuring dams aren't being built and so forth. But even though the Greens are what I think are almost a crypto-communist party in terms of their economic policies, in terms of the damage they want to wreak upon Australia, the media give them a free pass and give Labor a free pass. With us, even when we don't do a preference deal with one of the minor parties, we are seen and painted with this dark attitude by the media because of what you've just pointed out. That because we want to we have done a deal, because our preferences might go to a minor party before Labor, then suddenly we've done some terrible deal. But the main thing that I suppose frustrates me here is that for the Liberal National Party here in Queensland, it is very rare for our preferences to be distributed, because normally in state seats we come up first or second, and normally. And the other thing to say to people is that it's only a recommendation from the parties. I would be encouraging everybody watching along here to, please vote. I'm going to be shameless here. Please vote one Liberal National Party, and then your preferences won't be distributed. But if you don't want to vote for us, or you want to vote for a minor party or someone else, it's your choice. And it's your choice to decide where those votes go. And yes, my party will put out, my state executive will make a decision at a suitable time of for how to vote cards, where the preferences will go. But ultimately, it's up to the voter to decide that.
Yeah. I try and recommend to everybody all the time, never follow a how to vote card. But it is good for people who aren't prepared to think for themselves. If you're not prepared to do the research, if you're not prepared to engage and inquire with the candidates in your electorate, well, first, you've wasted an opportunity to influence them and help them better represent you. But B, you've missed the opportunity to actually write your own how to vote card, to actually see who represents you the best. And the important thing that I want to get across is a vote isn't an endorsement or an agreement with everything about a candidate. It might even be better to think of it as a reverse order list of people that represent you the least through to people who represent you the best. And even if that's only 50%, if they represent you better than everybody else, then that's got to be who you give your first preference to, and so on down. So it's not, it's exactly what it says. In what order would you prefer these people to represent you? And if you can answer that, look, you'll put more time into researching your new fridge than it will take to communicate with these people. And there's a lot more at stake. So go to the effort. And forget every how to vote card. And look, and that way, and no politician should disagree with that, because they are claiming to represent you. And that's good. So look, I do want to bring in our guests now, and let's say hello to Wendy Francis and Kurt Marlberg. Thank you very much for joining us both.
Great to be with you, Dave.
Now, Wendy, I actually want to go to you first. You're the state director for both Queensland and the Northern Territory in the Australian Christian Lobby. And coincidentally, very topical right now, because both states, both the state and territory, have got an election coming up in less than just a handful of months. Northern Territory first, and then Queensland. Tell us, what's the issues at stake in the Northern Territory election coming up, and what does the Australian Christian Lobby think we should be prioritising as the issues to compare candidates on in this coming election?
Sure. Thanks, Dave, and it's great to be with you all. The issues that we have are probably similar right around the country. So we're concerned for education, we're concerned for health, we're concerned for certainly all of the family issues that we advocate for. In the Northern Territory, the government there's been instability in the government for a number of terms. And so there's a new party that has been formed, the Territory Alliance, and funnily enough, they have more members in the Territory Alliance than they actually have in the opposition, which is the Country Liberal Party. So the Labor Party is in power, but there are more on the crossbench than the opposition. So it's a very unusual place. Last election, they had the worst voting record, so the least number of people actually go out to vote.
Wow.
It's a very relaxed sort of atmosphere up there. The Indigenous population are not inclined to vote either. They feel extremely marginalised. And there's a lot of health issues. So that's in a bit of a nutshell. I'm sure James has got more to say about it as well. He's very interested in the Northern Territory too. But some of our kids live up there, so we get up there. It's a beautiful part of the country, very hot always, but it's beautiful, particularly right at this time.
James, from the LNP's perspective, from the Liberal National Coalition's perspective, what are the main issues that we should be concerned about facing Territorians in the coming election?
I should declare a conflict of interest in a way here, in that I was campaign director for the CLP in 2012 when Terry Mills was the then leader and became Chief Minister. And sadly, for whatever reasons, that government fell into what can only be called a pretty rough and pretty ugly period of government. So Leah Finocchiaro is the leader of the CLP. She's someone campaigning on bringing accountability back to government, campaigning on getting resource development moving on in the state, but also just campaigning to get some good people into Parliament. She's got a really good range of candidates, ranging from Tracy Hayes, who used to be head of the Cattlemen's Union up in the Territory, to Josh Burgoyne, who's running down one of the Alice Springs seats. The main thing that she's really pushing for is actually economic development. The Northern Territory economy, the Darwin economy, is a complete and utter car crash at the moment. Caused, people will blame coronavirus, but as someone who goes there on a regular basis, it's been caused by the inactivity of the Territory Labor government, who are an appalling government in terms of their inability to make decisions and their inability to understand that it is important for a government to provide leadership to help grow the economy, not just to continue to play political games. The election's coming up on the last Saturday in August. They have very small electorates there of about 5,000 voters.
Wow.
A lot of people be out, very small, very local. You really know who your local MLA is.
Yeah.
A lot of door knocking. Oh, the other issue I should mention is crime. Crime is always an ongoing issue in the Territory. In terms of how you deal with why people get into crime, and then how do you deal with them once they're sort of caught up in that system.
Yeah.
James,
Wendy, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I don't disagree that the Labor government has been terrible with the economy, but I think it has been successive governments, and I think it's been a while. And they at the moment, well, the Labor government in the last election, they basically, I think they bought their way in many ways. They offered 30 grand to every school if they got in, and that's what they did. But they didn't have the money, so they're borrowing to even give gifts like that. So it was. So I don't disagree with you, but I do think that it's a long-term thing. They're paying the interest that they're paying daily. It would be enough to shock anybody.
Wow. Wendy, talk us through the initiative of the Australian Christian Lobby with this website, ntvotes.org.au. I particularly like this list of candidates with their contact details. This is such a great tool to facilitate people. Here's your list. If you're in the electorate of Daly, those are the 5 emails or phone calls you need to make. It's quicker than choosing a fridge.
Absolutely. And because I think, again, one of the things that James said there is really important with Leah trying to really get good quality candidates. And I think the Territory Alliance have got some good candidates as well. The important thing is to get good people in there, smart people, people who are not just wanting to be a politician and have the glory that brings. We want smart people who really care about the Northern Territory. And so that list of candidates, I'm really encouraging people, contact your candidates, know who you're voting for, find out for yourselves. Don't just, look at whoever looks the best or whoever's got the most money. Find out who is really going to speak for our values and also speak for all Territorians.
Kurt, just want to bring you in. I know, sympathise that you're probably not totally au fait with Northern Territory politics. I know I am completely out of my depth. But talk to me about your observations and the difference or the value between the presidential style elections where people are voting for someone based on looks or personality as opposed to policies, and how you explain it to your friends when you're trying to encourage them to be a little bit more intelligent about their vote.
Yeah, look, I guess I'm fairly new to this whole area myself of being politically engaged. I attended the Church and State Conference last year and took some of your really good advice on board around taking, I guess, Election Day a lot more seriously and really thinking about my vote and how it impacts the nation. But I guess, I come at things probably from more of a cultural perspective, and I certainly can see that we're very big, and we have been for many decades now, of just looking at a person's appeal, personal appeal, personality, and I guess, speaking from my generation as well, we almost look at candidates from a almost celebrity point of view, and instead of looking at it from the point of view of policy and how it's actually going to affect the future of the state. So, I love your analogy, Dave, talking about, selecting a fridge. I think you're totally right. We pick out, appliances in our house with a lot more thought and care than we do political candidates at the moment. And I guess my big encouragement would be to listen to that advice and really take seriously our vote, because it might just be one day, it might just be a week of news that you're listening to and tuning into before Election Day, but that is going to affect things for the next 3 or 4 years. So, that would probably be what I'd add to the conversation.
Brilliant. Any further thoughts on the NT, Wendy, or do you want to bring us over to the Queensland election?
The other thing I'd really say is the health. We need the government to concentrate on health in the Northern Territory, and particularly for some of the communities. I think it would surprise people to know some of the statistics from up there. So Maningrida is one of the Aboriginal communities. It's in a beautiful part of the country again. They have a very small health clinic, but they're the same size as Longreach. So they don't have any hospital. If they want anything, tonsils, anything like that, it's big trips. And many of the people don't even want to go away from home. We've got to, when we talk about bridging the gap, I think when we look at the Northern Territory, there's an awful lot that we can actually do.
Yep. Well, that does bring us to the Queensland election, and that's Saturday the 31st of October, and it makes a lot more national headlines than the Northern Territory election. James, you're a Queensland senator. What are the major issues that Queenslanders need to be considering if they're going to vote honestly and look at what are the big issues you think the LNP is putting forward?
The first thing to remember about Queensland is that Labor have basically been in power for 25 of the last 30 years. So we won, the last election we won, apart from 2012, was actually in 1986. So we were in government in the mid-90s with the Paul Sheldon government as a minority government. So you've got an LNP up against a long-standing, long-serving Labor government. And what that means is you've got a government who aren't making decisions because they've come used to being in government, and they're just not driving the economy. So it's everything from, Acland Mine being pushed, the expansion being pushed by New Hope, which is, been laying off staff. It's been going on for over a decade. It's to the building of dams. So in Queensland, we face a situation where the Labor government is not only not building dams, it's tearing dams down. And I can be complete not a dam bore about what they're doing with the Paradise Dam southwest of Bundaberg. So it's that critical infrastructure. But then there's how they're supporting business in terms of making it a business-friendly environment. Then we can get into, the taxes that Labor keep putting in. Deb has said no new taxes. We go into, and Wendy may come in on this in terms of how the Department of Families, it has a broader name than that, how it is being run and how it is failed to be run. And Deb has said, Deb Freckland has said she's essentially going to send the police in there to create a task force comprised of police within that department.
Let's come back to families, and I just want you to comment on the fact that there's now 3 federal Labor members who are backing the new Acland coal mine, and just to get your comments on that, and then we'll come to Wendy to talk about ACL's initiatives.
Well, thank goodness, finally, but what does that actually mean? That 3 Labor members finally have come out in support of jobs. This is what this is about. It is jobs for Oakey and for that part of the Darling Downs. And I've been to this mine site. I've gone through it and seen the brilliant work that the folks are doing there. But we need the state Labor government to do something about it. But guess what? They won't. They're using the excuse of there's a matter in the High Court at the moment. State Labor will not do anything about the expansion of Acland Mine because they've done a dodgy preference deal with the Greens. I hate to be partisan, but look, I'm an LNP senator. This is what it's about. It's black and white. The Labor will not support at a state level the expansion of the Acland Mine, and that means that the 150 people who lost their jobs before Christmas last year will be matched by more people losing their jobs over the coming 12 months. And if that doesn't make the Premier lose sleep at night, then what's the point of her being Premier of the state?
Yeah, agreed. And look, this mine is not new. It's not Adani. It's been working with the community for 100 years or more, which is, I didn't even know there were coal mines that were 100 years old in Australia. But that's just amazing. And it's time to move on to the next deposits. Wendy, what's the ACL saying is important in and guys, head to queenslandvotes.org.au if you want some help from the Australian Christian Lobby on the issues and candidates. Wendy.
So ACL is not party partisan, so we are careful to say that, to preface that. But at the same time, I do think that this is one of the most important elections that we have faced in my lifetime. And that sounds really drastic, but I think it is. And
it's frequently true.
Yeah, COVID has made it all the more complicated, and it makes it harder, certainly harder to change government. But some of the big issues for us this time, and some of the things that I've been really thrilled at with the announcements from the LNP are things that are very close to my heart, but also close to the supporters of Queensland, of ACL in Queensland. So ACL has grown enormously through the early years. Through when I started, we had Jim Wallace. I think our numbers were probably about 10,000. They grew through Lyle Shelton's leadership, and now under Martin Isles's leadership, we have about 180,000 supporters. So we're the second largest political lobby group in the nation, as far as I can tell, only beaten by Get Up. So that means that our voice is listened to, which is a great thing. And we've been lobbying on a number of issues, particularly on the abortion issue. It's a sensitive issue, and I am certainly not in any condemnation of anyone tonight watching who has had an abortion or is even considering an abortion. But the Labor Party put through laws that go completely against any community standards. We now have abortion laws that allow abortion to birth, and there is no exemptions. There are 2 doctors after a certain time, but there are still no exemptions. We're talking about healthy babies being aborted that can be aborted up to birth. So when you hear that the LNP is saying, look, if we get into power, we're going to do 3 things with the abortion legislation. We're going to review it for a start. We're going to look at gestational limits. We're going to look at counselling, and we're going to look at abortion coercion, which is the unnamed domestic violence area.
Absolutely.
That we really need to look at. And so when you hear that, when you hear Deb Frethington say, look, we don't really want to look at euthanasia laws until we fix palliative care, then those are really important to ACL people. When you hear Mark McArdle push back on the whole gay conversion legislation that was tried to be put through from the ALP as well, which was just, it basically turned doctors into criminals unless they followed a certain pattern that the government was actually dictating how doctors should actually diagnose their patients. And if they didn't, it became a criminal matter, not even a health matter. So these sort of crazy overstep, the LNP is saying they're going to pull back on that. And so I am really very supportive of all those things and therefore supportive of a change of government.
Well, just another plug again for Wendy's website, giving you information. It's ntvotes.org.au for the Northern Territory election and QLD votes for the Queensland election, qldvotes.org.au. And as I said, they try and take a conservative approach to it as opposed to a partisan approach. Is that fair? I didn't really say that right, did I, Wendy?
No, that's absolutely right. I tell people I actually sometimes refer to myself as a swing voter, to be honest, because I really do think that we've got to get good people in there.
I prefer the term undecided voter.
Okay.
I can't promise to go from side to side, but I can promise that I will make the decision fresh every election. And politicians are on notice. I want to have intellectual, honest conversations with you so you can earn my vote, but you have to work for me. And that's how you get my vote. It's just like Coles. If you want my money, you have to stock the products that I want. Put it on the shelf. I'm not a swing shopper, but I'll go where the products are good consistently.
And I think then over the top of that, there are sometimes these big issues that parties come out and make statements on that you really have to look carefully at the big issues as well.
Yeah, that's right. Kurt, Stephen Kyler here says, in terms of the election in Queensland, and this is going to be a fairly accurate comment around the world, around electorates, the single biggest issue is the word jobs. A family without a job is simply behind every 8 ball. The family unit is secured by the parents. Being able to economically provide COVID-19 is the most extreme economic threat Australia has faced in the last 95 years. Jobs is the number one issue. What do you think the average government can do or should do or shouldn't do to make jobs easier to come by family members?
I mean, probably the best thing a government can do is really get out of the way and just let people work and let businesses thrive. I mean, I'm a conservative by instinct, and I believe in small government because I think the more that you leave the initiative up to people, the more that they're going to step up to opportunities, enjoy what they do, be passionate about it, and not rely on big government bodies, the state, or various welfare arms to we obviously need those there as a net to fall into, when things go wrong. But there's not a whole lot of motivation if that's your main solution to every problem. Leaning back on the government or on some kind of great big group of people out there who are faceless and nameless. I think people and families thrive when they're given the opportunities and the joy of carving their way through life and facing the challenges that come along, including providing for their family. So I think governments that get out of the way are the best kind of governments.
Now, one of the things that's been on the radar in the Queensland election is that, some people think Labor Party's doing terribly right now and LNP's a shoo-in. There's some other people who are not so sure. And some of those people made moves recently to, count the numbers and see whether or not Deb Frecklington really should be the leader with the most potential to get us across the line. And that was quickly put to death. She had overwhelming party support, and I think a lot of us say good. But, James, that does harken back to the conversation, I guess, as a strategist with so much experience. You are perhaps a little bit infamous among conservative circles for the significant role that you played in getting rid of a sitting Conservative Prime Minister for, I believe, the first time in our party's history, and then helping replace him with Malcolm Turnbull. So the question for you is, now with hindsight being 2020, are there any regrets? Can you walk us through, I guess, the things you were thinking in making that decision, if you regret them now with the way Malcolm Turnbull's Prime Ministership turned out?
Up front, and I've said this before, that I do have regrets. I have a lot of regrets, and what I did, and what the party room did, was particularly difficult. My actions have always been driven by what I think is in the best interest of the party, and people are free to disagree with me, and they certainly did in that period in September 2015, where I had many friends and colleagues here in Queensland leave me in no doubt as to their unhappiness with me. But my actions, though, that how I can, when I do lose sleep at night and I then finally go to sleep, is what I think is in the best interest of the party. A party that, first campaign I worked for when I was a teenager, a party that I bleed and die for, and it is unfortunate. It's probably an understatement that Malcolm had such potential to be a good Prime Minister, but ended up being such a disappointment. I'm using my language very carefully here, because I don't want to get this podcast a rating that means children can't see it. That Malcolm fundamentally failed to understand Queensland, and even when I, as his parliamentary secretary, would say, this is what people in Queensland are thinking. This is what we need to do. And I give you the example of innovation. Innovation on itself is actually quite a good policy in terms of understanding, because business, as Kurt said, get government out of the way, because business will actually innovate by itself. They'll adapt to the market. But what innovation, when it is as a government policy and is forced down the people, necks of people, what it says to people in Queensland is, hang on, I'm going to lose my job. And the government's facilitating me losing my job, because as Steve said earlier, the number one issue in Queensland always is jobs and that economic empowerment. So, people were going to McDonald's, as I do. Clearly, you don't get a physique like this by, living on carrot juice alone. People were going to McDonald's and were seeing they could order food on a flat screen. They'd go to Coles and Woolies and go to self-service checkouts. That's innovation. That says jobs are going. So I realise I'm on a tangent here, but for men, especially men between the age of 45 and 65, innovation said, from Malcolm Turnbull, I'm going to take your job. And as for digital disruption said to people, you're going to lose your job, your house, and you're going to be living in a car down the street in a park. Malcolm just didn't understand Queensland. And this is why, going back to your question, your leadership is important, especially in our movement. The conservative movement, as much as we do say we are a series of individuals, and we actually are a leadership-focused party. And you look at the good leaders of the Conservative movement here in Australia. I talk about Menzies, I can talk about Blackjack, I can talk about Howard, is that they are uniters. They bring the party together. Malcolm sadly didn't do that. ScoMo is doing that. ScoMo has brought the party is so incredibly united. Like he's John Howard 2.0.
So I guess what would you do differently next time the question comes up without the benefit of hindsight? Is there a lesson, a template that can be applied to the way the decision is made in the future when you've got a leader who has in consecutive elections added significant number of seats to the government, but is doing, let's say, terribly in the polls? What template would you advise the party room to, the government party room of either party, but I guess the coalition, to take to that a similar scenario in the near future?
Oh, the PM,
hopefully not too near.
No. Look, ScoMo is as long as Australian people vote for the Liberal National Party, ScoMo will be our leader. He's got that connection.
Take personalities out, hypothetically.
What I was trying to say is that one of the first changes that the Prime Minister made was to change the rules in the party room to say that it was hard to make it harder for there to be a change of Prime Minister. So you effectively brought in a 2/3 rule, which means that it would have to be a complete and utter catastrophe for there to be a change of leader. But also, you do learn from your mistakes, and this is the one thing that we've got to think about politicians. And people can throw stones at me. I've made mistakes, but I've never tried to repeat my mistakes, and that's what you do, because politicians are only human. Sometimes we put politicians up on a pedestal, and they have all the failings that we do have on this podcast and people listening to it. And it's how people deal with making mistakes and how not to repeat them in the future. Yeah.
Look, it's probably fair to ask Lyle Shelton's question. And you obviously would have known him well during the 2017 election year. Following the election, Malcolm Turnbull is the Conservative Prime Minister who brought us the undefinition of marriage. So Lyle asks, did Malcolm Turnbull make a mistake in supporting the agenda of the activists and the consequences for children's education in gender fluid ideology? Do you think he understood the consequences for freedom of speech and religion that are now being dealt with? The rights of children to their mother and father. Is this the part of your regret in supporting him? James, we'll ask you that first, and then I'll get Kurt and Wendy to give their opinion on that question as well.
Look, I don't think Malcolm probably did fully understand that. I've got many regrets for my support of Malcolm. You could probably add that up, but it's it's something that I'm on the record for. Malcolm fundamentally, I think, just didn't understand his own party and understand what I call the conservative base, and didn't understand that our party, the conservative base, actually does have two elements to it, and it's the John Howard Broad Church. It's the conservative and the liberal wing. And my view is that sometimes I don't think Malcolm understood either wings. He certainly didn't understand the conservative wing.
Wendy, what are your thoughts on that question? Do you want me to put that back up?
That'd be good to put it back up. Thanks, Lyle, for the question. Lyle's voice during the marriage campaign was just inspiring, and all the way through, he was saying, within a short space of time, we're going to see this impact on our children, particularly in education. We're going to thought that it would happen as quickly as it has. And I've had people say to me, there's nothing really that's changed. And I say, well, you mustn't have children in school or grandchildren in school because the school, the education system has changed enormously. But not only that, in removing gender from marriage, we've removed any understanding of what gender is. And so now children are taught that their gender is on a spectrum, that their gender is not only able to be changed, but that it actually fluctuates during the day. These are the lessons that I could put up, on the screen that are part of our education system, the curriculum. And then we have not only that, but we now have children who are bereft of a mother. They have two dads and no mother, or they have two mums and no dad. And obviously, even through the marriage campaign, these were the sort of things that Lyle was warning about. And we don't doubt that there are tragic circumstances where a child that they lose their mother or their father, but that's seen as something tragic. And we now have that over and over again happening with the rise of surrogacy. During the COVID, it was just, well, we're still in COVID, but during this time, it has been absolutely frustrating to me to see the ABC advocate for people who are so terribly sad because their surrogate baby is in Ukraine or something and they can't get their surrogate baby. That's supposed to be actually illegal. But the ABC are really sad that for the parents. Well, I'm just devastated for the children of these. Yeah.
Kurt, what do you think? Do you think Malcolm Turnbull was fully cognizant of the damage he was doing to freedom of speech, freedom of religion in undefining marriage?
Look, I think James probably nailed it in saying he more or less probably wasn't tuned in. I don't know the inner workings of Malcolm's brain, or I'm not sort of across the Malcolm Turnbull kind of legacy myself either. But obviously, I was there when the marriage definition was undefined, as you say, and I weighed into the debate on my own blog. I wrote about it. But whether or not, I guess to some degree, even as a Christian, and as a conservative, I think to some degree was probably misled by some of the debate that went on. I think I gave the benefit of the doubt to the people who were saying, look, this is all we want. We don't want any more, and we're not going to take any more. We're not going to do any more. All we want is for men to be able to marry men and women to be able to marry women. And to some degree, I guess I took that for granted. Maybe I was a bit naive and a bit new to the conservative trenches. But 3 years on, and so much more ground has been demanded. And I just recently wrote on this topic, actually, and I think it was a library in Newcastle. Basically, they said, we had all these people during the marriage debate saying that, once this is redefined, it's not going to affect anything else. And yet Newcastle Library said, because of the marriage debate, therefore we should be fine in having drag queens read storybooks to 3-year-olds in our library. And that's just one example, but there's many more. People who 3 years ago were saying it's not going to mean anything else, it's not going to lead to anything else, are now turning around and using the same justification for all sorts of other things, many of which Wendy has covered. I mean, gender transition surgery for, children, in some cases outside of the awareness of their parents, like that's a huge issue as well. And so I just think a lot of us actually were pretty misled. Maybe Malcolm Turnbull himself was somewhat misled by this. So I don't know. What do you think, Dave? Was it misleading, or was it that the tactics or the strategies actually changed, the motives actually changed partway through?
I don't think Malcolm Turnbull was ever interested in religious freedom or freedom of speech. I think he's the best Prime Minister the Labor Party ever had. And I think at best he was virtue signalling any kind of right-wing credentials. I'm happy to be called cynical, but there's no doubt to be given the benefit of in my mind. If he was a believer in free speech, I would hate to see a critic. If he's a believer in religious freedom, I'd hate to see a critic, because with friends like that, who needs enemies? He had 1,000 opportunities in the debate on the legislation of undefining marriage to enshrine at the same time protections for the inevitable and predictable consequences. And now conservatives around the country are entitled to sit back and say, we told you so. We told you so.
Absolutely.
And the gallery laughed, as we heard on the Conservative One podcast with George Christensen and Lyle Shelton, as George Christensen's speaking to some of the amendments being put up. The gallery, Malcolm Turnbull's cheer squad, were cheering every time one of these amendments was defeated. And when George Christensen called them out as being cheering for the defeat of religious freedom, they confirmed with more cheers. It was despicable. It was disheartening, and it was led by a Liberal Prime Minister. And so I think it's generous to say he wasn't aware, and the kind of charity that I perhaps should have more of. But it was that's my answer.
Well, Dave, I might come in here just in
Please.
terms of talking about freedom of speech, and this is probably where I'm being a bit cynical, that Malcolm certainly did believe in freedom of speech, and I'm being totally cynical here, because he wanted The Guardian to come to Australia, the most left-wing broadsheet publication in the United Kingdom. I mean, if anyone's had an experience with the UK media, The Guardian has never, ever backed a Conservative Prime Minister or a Conservative government since its formation. And yet Malcolm, when you find things out, when he was the Shadow Communications Minister under Tony Abbott, was looking at how he could facilitate the arrival of The Guardian, a publication that was going to express its freedom of speech from a left-wing perspective, to openly campaign against those of us who have centre-right ideas. I mean, this is, maybe I'm a bit slow, but for someone who to sit as a Liberal member of Parliament, to even think about doing that, I just feel sick thinking about that. That is just the worst.
Now, another topic that I want to finish on, and for those watching, the show formally ends at 9 o'clock, but after that we go into overtime, where we're going to pick up loose threads, things we wish we could have said earlier, but we ran out of time because that annoying host just kept moving things on, and plus some other topics that we haven't got to yet, which are very interesting tonight. And so that next topic is, I guess, very related to this, and that is, what is a conservative? Is a conservative, is it enough to be economically conservative and claim the conservative label? Can you even separate social conservatism from economic conservatism? So, Kurt, let's start with you. Is somebody who's economically conservative but pro-homosexual marriage a conservative?
Look, it's a really good question, and I guess in some ways it's hard to answer, because I guess whatever issue is being discussed at the present time is the one that defines whether that's true or not. So in the case of, say, Queensland, before we were talking about the abortion laws, I'm, as a believer, as a Christian and as a conservative, I'm going to want to, I guess, link arms and go shoulder to shoulder with people who are on the same page as me on that issue. And yet, when it's another election that's being fought on different stakes, then perhaps it would shift to the economic issues. And so I guess I do have sympathy for the idea of separating them at times. But I can also see that there's some pretty strong connections too. One of which is what I mentioned earlier around the government being either in the way and really involved, or stepping out of the way as much as possible and letting people live their lives and giving people the freedom. So I guess that's as a newbie to the whole kind of area, that's probably what I would say.
Your thoughts, Wendy? Philosophical definitions of conservatism versus other political pigeonholes one may find oneself in. Is a conservative someone who's only economically conservative?
No, I don't think that is a true conservative, because I think a true conservative believes in an enduring moral order. I think there is a sense of a moral order. I think that a true conservative is skeptical of social change. They are very concerned about issues of family life. Family is really important to a true Conservative. I think the word prudence is something that is important to a Conservative, and so prudence then goes into the economic side of things as well. So a prudence in government spending and debt. So I think it's tied together, and I don't think you can separate the economy from family issues. We talked about that in the Northern Territory, but if you're talking about, even if you're talking about infrastructure and roads, you're talking about being able to get home to your family. That's why you want to have good infrastructure. To me, it's all very much linked.
Yep. So, James, your thoughts. Do you consider yourself outspoken on social issues, or are you deliberately reserved? And if you don't mind, can we explore the rationale behind that, whatever the answer is?
Yeah, I'm obviously, I think, very outspoken on economic issues. In terms of social issues,
can I just applaud your outspoken on economic issues? I liked your statement to the Parliament that the ABC should justify its current budget properly before asking for any more. Excellent, thank you. Well done.
Thank you for that bouquet. I'm sure there might be a brickbat to come, but
hashtag not Q&A.
Andy wants to buy Holden for $1.
Yes, well, I want to buy the brand for $1 so we can bring it back to Australia. But on the social issues, and even though I consider myself probably broadly socially conservative, it's just something I just don't talk about publicly, and your listeners may have an issue with that. The way I was raised was, and I was raised in a very political household, but it was always that that your social views are your views, and there may seem an hypocrisy here, which I will acknowledge, that your social views are your views, and you shouldn't impose them on other people. And I've always sort of kept to that. So I probably will then fail the test Kurt and Wendy have put in that publicly I'll always talk about smaller government, lower taxes, fighting red tape, freedom, all those sort of things. But when it comes to those social issues, I tend not to talk about those. In Parliament, I will always vote what I think in terms of a pro-life agenda, notwithstanding the lack of federal government responsibility in that area. But that's just.
I have to take exception to that, but I'll let you finish.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Well, there's compared to the states, let's say. So that's just how I've approached politics since coming into the Senate in 2014.
Let me very briefly summarise my rebuttal. That I would that the federal government, wash its hands of involvement in abortion. Please defund it. Stop spending my money on something I find morally abhorrent. Please take it out of the realm of federal politics immediately. Make it happen. What can you do? Where do we sign up for that policy? Because that would make the nation instantly, remarkably better. But while federal tax dollars are being spent on it hand over fist, it's definitely and always will be a federal issue until it's no longer funded federally.
I will take that rebuttal. That is correct and well said.
So, Kurt, your thoughts on and look, I appreciate, James, you're very gracious to submit yourself and your ideas to scrutiny, and the reverse is equally true. I did love having Joe Hildebrand on, and there's not enough honest disagreement. There's not enough dishonesty in politics. There's not enough honest disagreement in media generally. And I think pursuing truth together is a noble thing, and I'm happy to be corrected when wrong so that I can stop being wrong. But Kurt, your thoughts on, I guess, keeping your social opinions to yourself?
Yeah, interesting you bring that up, Dave, because I was thinking about that a lot as James was answering. And I mean, the cancel culture issue that's come out the last week with the letter, was it to the Harper magazine, J.K. Rowling and other prominent, public figures, most of whom were centre left or quite far left, who I guess are in various stages of right now being cancelled for, coming out in defence of free speech. And I guess we've also looked at, Donald Trump. He's been in power now for 4 years and very much is cancelled as far as, kind of mainstream culture is concerned. And I just think that I know that there is a natural reluctance for people from places like Australia to speak on religious, social, moral issues. Right. But I feel like I've learnt a lot just observing Donald Trump, observing the cancel culture phenomenon, and just realising that rather than waiting to get cancelled, just out yourself and get cancelled as soon as possible so you can just get in the fray. And I know I have the luxury of saying that because I'm not an elected member like James is. But for me, that's been quite a freeing thing to just realise that, at the end of the day, there's a lot of people I never will please. And as the sooner I stop caring about that, the better, because then I can actually say what I really think. So, and I will always do that with grace and with love because I follow Jesus and that was his way. But I can still own that view and not apologise for it. And I think there's a lot of freedom in that.
Certainly good ambition and great role model, Kurt. I wish I was as successful as frequently as you are, but even more so as often as Wendy is. Wendy being the most gracious opiner amongst us. How valid do you think the strategy is of playing the long game, of not putting yourself all out there and getting into those positions of leadership and influence and power within a major party of the left or right variety, to be able to affect some significant change where it's probably fair to say you might not get in those positions with wearing your heart on your sleeve?
Well, politics is a game of strategy, and I think to a degree there's compromise that happens as well. But I would never be prepared to compromise on things that shouldn't be compromised on, if that makes sense. I think it was John Howard, or it might have been Tony Abbott, that said that, if the silent majority remains silent, they won't be the majority for much longer. And I think, what James and Dave, I think you've both touched on this, that we need to be able to disagree on these things. We need to be able to debate these things. I need to be able to speak freely about these things. And James, you need to be able to speak freely about these things. And the more we are frightened or in some way intimidated out of this, the social spaces, the less that we feel as if we're free to. And I think that it's really important for leaders to be able to show the way in being able to speak the truth on these matters in public, so that the plebs feel like they can speak it too. We need to be able to. There are incredibly vulnerable people behind these social issues. When we're talking about issues like abortion or euthanasia, if we're talking about issues like prostitution, some of the issues of sexualization of children and trafficking, we're talking about social issues that have the most vulnerable people of all. And when we're talking about particularly abortion, we're not just talking about vulnerable babies, which of course we are, but we're talking about extremely vulnerable women. And we need to be starting to speak out. But as you say, Dave, tone really matters. Love really matters. Kurt, you said, going to speak like Jesus spoke. That's just so important. But we did not hesitate to speak out for the vulnerable always. And that's what he wants us to do as well.
Yep. Any further thoughts, James? Can we entice you to becoming a robust defender of socially conservative values in a war where they're under constant assault, and to abdicate the battleground is to lose the battle?
I always up for a fight, and I'm always up to to defend what I call freedom. In terms of the broad fight that's going on in Australia is what I see between those who believe in freedom, and whether it's freedom of speech, freedom of association, and freedom of thought, and what, and I've actually said this in my maiden speech, what the left are doing in terms of how they imprison words and almost create a gulag for thoughts and for those who have views that they may disagree with. I think one of the best things that we've seen recently in Australia is Scott Morrison, and I'm not renowned for I'm not engaging in sucking up to the boss here or anything like that. I'm on the backbench for a reason. I'm a troublemaker, but it's having politicians.
Queenslanders like our troublemakers.
Yeah, so I look at some of my colleagues and I go, we're permanently ready for a fight sometimes. You just have to say the word and we'll be there. But it's a serious point about politicians. There are politicians who will get up there and they will say what you want to hear. And, Dave and I talked about Kevin Rudd. I'm not being partisan, but there's a point to this. Kevin Rudd, and I was overseas when...
Sometimes the truth is partisan.
Yes. It's a happy coincidence. But he would do a press conference outside a church every Sunday. And I was, working for, I think it was with, I was with the Tories before I went on the Boris campaign. And I'd watch this and see the photos and go, this guy is such a fake. Like, he might hold Christian values, but just the way he presented to me was fake. Whereas you look at our PM, he doesn't do things like that. It was very rare. During the campaign, there was one photo of him at, it was in Brisbane, and he was he was at a service. And did you remember the mockery he received from the left? The left who lapped up Kevin Rudd's photo opportunities in front of a church, whereas our PM once allowed the media in, and it was a private visit he did. I think you've got to look at how politicians live their values, and the PM lives the values, and he doesn't. And I think that's the best way in terms of one of the better ways of how we can defend what we believe in is living those values. He does that.
Yeah. I early on in my YouTube career a few years back, it's hardly worth calling a career. I did an interview with Matt Prater. Pastor Matt Prater went on Q&A prior to the federal election a couple of elections ago, and he asked Kevin Rudd about marriage, and Kevin Rudd basically mocked him for his question and said, the Bible endorses slavery, therefore, how seriously can you take it? All words to that effect. And I titled that interview with Pastor Matt Prater, "Don't Vote for a Christian." And the moral to the story was, if you put Julia Gillard, her prime ministership, side by side with Kevin Rudd, and you had to choose between the two of those, on one hand, you've got an atheist shacked up with her boyfriend who, while in government at least, maybe not now, but while in government, she defended God's definition of marriage. And then you had the person who took photo ops outside the church every Sunday, who in government opposed God's definition of marriage. And so side by side, do you think Jesus would vote for the atheist who supported his policies or the Christian who opposed his policies? And so that's why I say don't vote for a Christian, because it's not that I don't want Christians in government. I do generally. I think they've got better policies than those who don't. But case by case, we employ people because of their skills and suitability for the job, not because of the badge on their sleeve. That's just identity politics, and it's not helpful. I don't hire a plumber because he's a Christian, and I don't want to hire a politician because he's a Christian. I would hope that they would share my ideas, but I have to survey them and interview them and check they're qualified for the job as a higher matrix for making that decision. Let's wrap it up. I want to move on to another topic, but let's just wrap this First hour up, now 9 minutes overtime. But any final thoughts on the discussion so far? Senator McGrath.
I hope you have me back on some other time, just in terms of having a good old discussion. I've got other issues I want to raise, in terms of China and things like that. In terms of, I think that
I'd love to do that.
later.
I'd be honoured.
Yes.
Yeah, I'd be honoured. Wendy, any thoughts on what topics we've touched on so far?
Not really on the topics, Dave. I think they're important, all of them, and I think it's a really good opportunity to talk and to have people tune in. And the comments, I've loved watching the comments on the bottom, so please keep them going, everybody. But I think it's also really, I love the fact that you've got young Kurt, who I'm just feel so proud of. And then you've got a senator as well, who we don't hear enough from our senators. I think that the role of politician is extremely difficult and very demanding, and often must get bogged down in all that comes across your desk, James. But it's great to be able to hear from someone who is in your position and to be able to talk. So thanks very much, Dave.
My pleasure. Thank you, Wendy. And Kurt, any final thoughts for the hour?
Yeah, look, I've really enjoyed the discussions as well. And like Wendy was saying, the diversity of experience and walks of life. I feel like you rounded it out well before, Dave. We sort of went full circle from at the beginning talking about elections and who we're voting for and what their policies are, as opposed to what their personality looks like. And, in the end, we were talking about a prime minister or a leader who says they're a Christian and may or may not actually act and live and believe in such a way. So I guess my take-home message and one to encourage people to think through is, just don't believe what it says on the tin. Actually look inside and examine the contents, think about it, and go a bit deeper, because words, the definition of words continually is changing. Sometimes that's happenstance, and a lot of the time that's manipulation.
I like that word. Happenstance.
Don't just listen to the words that people are using, but actually think about the definitions and what's really going on underneath. So,
brilliant. Well, we're going to move into another question now, but just briefly, I'd like to promote these guys. You can find all their details, their websites, and the things they're talking about lately on Twitter, at Senator McGrath, at Wendy Joy Francis, and at K_Marlberg, and the spelling's there on the screen. For those listening to the podcast, it's Senator McGrath, McGrath, Wendy Joy Francis with a CIS at the end, and at K_Marlberg, MAHLBURG. So some final comments here. Grant Vandersea, long-time big fan of Senator McGrath for his honesty, humour, straight talking, and loving to get to know Kurt more and more now. Always a big fan of Wendy. Love your work, Wendy. Great guest. Hey, I do want to apologise to everybody. I briefly put up a comment before that I was trying to click on for options, and the user who made the comment was had a very anti-Semitic name in the handle. So that flashed up for a second. Apologies for that. And I have blocked that user from my channel. Just not welcome, not funny, not welcome. So apologies for that being up for a split second. And Tim Etherington says, still only $1 worth of the promised Holden topic. Well, Tim, stick around for overtime. We are going to get there very, very soon. But first, I do want to go to a topic that should be of particular interest to Wendy, and that is that the role of committees. So, Senator McGrath, the role of committees and the outcome of inquiries, how effective are they, and what weight do they carry? What kind of further questions would you like to ask Senator McGrath on the topic of committees and inquiries, Wendy?
Well, it is a great opportunity to ask you this, James, because I get personally quite frustrated. I've participated in a number of inquiries that end up with some really good recommendations. There's one that's currently underway looking at age verification. And we have these inquiries, we have Senate committees, a lot of time, money, a lot of your job, and then we have, 2 or 3 years later, we have another inquiry into sexualisation of children, for instance, and they refer to another inquiry and another inquiry. I often wonder, are they really worthwhile? Are these inquiries really worthwhile? I mean, here in Queensland, we are really dependent on the committee system because we don't have enough house. And again, how effective do you see them? And at the moment, there's a report out, Protecting the Age of Innocence, that's come from an inquiry looking at age verification laws, because the committee has finally made it very clear that porn is a health issue, particularly for our young people. And so the recommendations come out, that we just don't see anything happening. So can you help me with that?
Sure. The first thing I'd say is, yes, I do think the broad committee structure in the Senate works. Just to give everybody a 30-second update, the Senate isn't controlled by one party, and you have a series of what you call effectively standing committees. I'm chair of the Senate Education and Employment Legislation Committee. There is a references committee underneath that, which is chaired by a Labor member. So we've got the numbers on one, and Labor have the opposition have the numbers on the other. So we tend to look into legislation. References tend to look into particular issues, and then you also have a range of joint committees and also select committees. And when they do make recommendations, especially the references and the select committees, they are considered by the government with all seriousness. And the government, whether it's us or Labor, are to respond within a certain period of time in relation to the recommendations of that committee. Now, sometimes the government, I'm not saying our government, but the government in power may disagree with the recommendations that have been made by a particular committee, or what they might do is they might cherry pick, or that they might just accept the recommendations. And some of the issues that you touched upon there, I know that Peter Dutton, for example, without being in terms of him knowing that he's read the committee report, I'm sure his office has, certainly made some changes there. So you may not see specific acceptances of certain recommendations, but over a period of time, you may see a government pick up those recommendations. But then the challenge, I think, is, serious point, Wendy, is that if a committee has made the recommendations, and remember there's a range of committees in the Senate, it's to make sure that we don't forget about those recommendations. So I'm not being rude about myself and saying I've got, the mind of a goldfish, but a lot of committee reports come across senators' desks, and we need people like you, Wendy, to remind us if one of these committee reports falls through the cracks, and for to wind people like myself up, my other senators here in Queensland, to go, hang on, you lot, this report came out on this date. It's been with the government since this day. Why haven't you done anything? I'm not telling you I'm not asking you to do our job for us. I'm telling you that if you think we're not doing our job, to flick our ears and go, hang on, what's happening with this one? So that's really helpful. And I know that COVID also has interrupted some of the stuff too. But the report into Protecting the Innocence at the Age of Innocence was pointing out how incredibly vulnerable and how bad pornography and the access to pornography is for our children. And then COVID hit, and it was like Exhibit A, because it was just so bad. It has been so bad during COVID. And so we will be really advocating for that. But I think the other thing that I'd like to say about these committees is, in Queensland, you mentioned the terrible state of our families department. And it really, our foster care system, I just could weep. But there are recommendations and there were inquiries and things into our foster care system that are still, even though we've changed legislation, legislation really allows our government to put children first in those situations, but they still don't. They put the adults first. They put
parents' rights before children's rights. And that's even after recommendations from these committees that continually say we've got to change, we've got to change, we've got to change, we've got to put children's interests first. Children's rights have got to come first. And sometimes it just feels like you're banging your head against a bit of a brick wall.
A bit of a brick wall, a rather large brick wall, because the issue with the Department of Families has been going on for some time. I remember almost 20 years ago, I was working for the Ombudsman, here in Queensland, and the issues and the complaints that came in relation to how that particular department dealt with certain matters. You talked about, they put the rights of the parents first. I actually probably disagree. They put the rights of the public servants ahead of the rights of the children in terms of what the children are being doing. Sometimes I think that department actually acts as a bit of a protection racket to defend bad practice within that department. And that's why I was happy to see the LNP at a state level go, hang on, we're going to set up a police task force within that department, because this is how serious the issue is. That's something that can I ask. Actually, I'm probably breaching a confidence here with about Deb. I asked Deb about it because I thought that was a really good policy. I've never seen that before. And Deb just said, "Well, I used to be a family lawyer. I'm used to dealing with this department. So that's something coming from the leader of the LNP based on her experience of dealing with the department. And I think that is reassuring."
Yeah, and I think Ros Bates' heart is really there too. But I've just seen children go back and back and back to situations where they are being seriously abused and sent back. Children who run away from places where they've been abused and they're found and sent back. It's an absolute tragedy.
Lyle Shelton says, "Good on you, Wendy. Keep speaking up for the innocence of children. All the more reason why Conservative politicians should not be silent and leave social policy to the left." That is the risk. And look, I'm 100% with you, Senator McGrath. I wish we didn't have to talk about social policy. I wish that good virtue, good character, these things were intrinsic to our population. I wish there wasn't a 10 to 20 year war on the definition of marriage, and we could worry about what's really important in this nation. But acquiescence isn't an option, given the character of the agendas that are clearly on display with drag queen story time and the comprehensive sexuality education. And the reprehensible gross sexualization and confusion in gender and sexuality of our children in school. Like, it's just ridiculous who's trying to raise our children and how they're trying to do it. And it's so often families are the target. Kids, women, marriages are the backbone of a thriving economy, if you want to be purely economic about it and not actually just concern for the welfare of our neighbours.
Certainly our children are the target in many of these issues, and this is why I really think it is important for people like yourself, James, to speak up on social issues, because children are the ones that are vulnerable. I'm reading directly from the report now, the Age of Innocence report, and this is from the government. It says the committee recognises that there is increasingly clear evidence that children and young people are being exposed to online pornography, and that this exposure is associated with a range of risks and harms. It goes on to talk about the widespread and genuine concern that they have. And then, for me, I just feel as if the government recognises that there's a serious issue, then for me, we can create a COVID app within days, and we can have the COVID app operating. Why is it that we can't all of a sudden, when we recognise that our children are being harmed, jump to it and actually make something happen? We can do it.
Very good call. Very good point. Well made, Wendy. It's amazing what we can do when we're motivated to, which is the indictment on what we don't do. Final topic before we wrap it up within 90 minutes. These conversations just go so well. Check out, by the way, the Good Source. Goodsource.news is the website address, and that's the place where you can get some really great news from some leading conservative thinkers in Australia, frequently updated. So good-looking bunch there: Bill Muhlenberg, Karina Okotel, James McPherson, George Christensen, yours truly, Lyle Shelton, Mark Powell, Mareka Rancy, sorry, Mareka, just forgot your name for a split second, and Bernard Gaynor, troublemakers all. And lots of really great articles there. And this is such a good example of what happens when you abdicate the social space. Obamacare was forcing this order of nuns called the Little Sisters to subsidize abortion-causing drugs to employees, which is just unconscionable. And it took somebody like Trump to fight it and defeat it. Last topic in the last 5 minutes. This is all yours. Senator offers to buy Holden for $1. In an extraordinary speech in federal parliament, a senator accused General Motors of using the coronavirus crisis to stonewall dealers, then offered to buy the Holden brand for $1. What was all that about?
It's not because I think the Holden brand is worthless. It's because I think it's actually priceless. So what's happened is that General Motors have made the decision to retire the Holden brand, and that's the decision they can make as a private company. But what I'm angry about is, as part of that decision, it means that the 185 or so Holden dealers around Australia, most of whom are actually family dealerships, where it's 3 or 4 generations now who've been running, especially in regional parts of the state, have been completely and utterly financially destroyed by this decision of General Motors. So what they've done is General Motors put an offer on the table about 3 months ago, and it was basically a take it or leave it. General Motors, pretended to effectively participate in some mediation with the dealers. It was basically a complete and utter sham. General Motors have acted with the most abhorrent lack of corporate morality that I've seen, in how they've devalued and destroyed the Holden brand here in Australia. And what I'm actually frightened about, and I'm not jumping on the anti-China bandwagon, but we all know that famous British brand, the MG. MG is no longer owned by the Brits. It's actually owned by a company based in Shanghai, a state-owned company. So there's nothing to stop General Motors from selling the Holden brand to a state-owned company in China. So there are 2 things. I wanted a fair deal, not a special deal, a fair deal for the Holden dealers and their families and their workers. And also I wanted the Holden brand to come back to Australia. So it was a bit of nationalism. But the main thing was standing up for these businessmen and women around Australia when a corporate vandal was destroying their businesses. And I'm still incredibly angry about how these Holden dealers have been dealt with by General Motors.
Yeah, now that is a big topic. I personally blame unions. I'm sure there's more facets to it. But yeah, I guess what exactly can the Holden dealers do with the brand without selling Holdens?
Well, at the moment, all the Holden dealers have had to accept the deal that was put on the table, and I think nearly all of them have done that. And for many of them, it means they're probably going to face serious financial damage, if not bankruptcy. So it's very sad. In terms of the actual Holden brand coming back to Australia, that's for someone who's smarter and brighter than I am in terms of whether they can do anything to rebirth the Holden brand here in Australia. Remembering that the Australian taxpayers put hundreds of millions of dollars into General Motors to subsidise General Motors. And once that subsidy was turned off, General Motors, effectively decided to leave the country. So they've taken the taxpayer for a ride. Well, what's to stop us, on behalf of the taxpayer, saying, well, please hand back that Holden brand and let the Holden dealers, let other people work out whether something can happen with it.
Yep, fair point. Fair point indeed. Well, let's put a pin in it there. I really appreciate all of you coming on. Kurt, thank you for stepping in to fill in for our unavailability at the last minute.
No worries,
Wendy,
Dave. Great to be with you.
thank you. As always, it's not your first time, won't be your last. Wendy, thank you very much. Super appreciate this is, you were one of my first interviews as well. I think certainly might have been number 3, quite early on. Always a long-time fan of the work you in particular do. If you want to head to Connor Court website, viewers, Wendy's got some great books there, which are the antidote to some of the gender confusion literature, so-called, now infesting our schools. It would be great if it's not in your school library to buy a couple of copies, one for boys, one for girls, and make sure that kids have something positive to read about who they are, because truth is a very valuable asset in education. And Senator McGrath, really appreciate your time, really appreciate your willingness to discuss things that we don't see eye to eye on. It's one of the hallmarks of conservatism, I think.
Civility. So thank you for having me on.
Yeah, and it is good, and maybe I'm not being fair to some of the old-fashioned lefties who still have some civility and ability to disagree. But that's it from us tonight. If you'd like to support the production of Pello Talk and other Good Source channels, please head to goodsource.news/support. That's SAUCE, goodsource.news/support. And don't forget to follow Senator McGrath, Wendy Joy Francis, and K_Marlberg on Twitter, and follow their links to their websites for more of the fantastic work that they do. But that's it for Pello Talk tonight. It's been a pleasure seeing you in the comments section, and we'll see you again next Tuesday night when we will have Senator Pauline Hanson, as well as some other regular contributors. And I'm looking forward to that conversation. And